I'd like to focus on the first half of that gospel passage. So forget about the judge and the magistrate and the constable and the prison. Okay, we're not going to talk about that today. Think back to the first part of the gospel, though. When you see a cloud rising in the west, you say that it's going to rain, and it does. When you notice the wind is blowing from the south, you say that it's going to be hot, and so it is. You know how to interpret the appearance of the earth and the sky. Why do you not know how to interpret the present time? What a timely text that is, I think, for us in our world. Now, I'm sure my learned friends here who have joined us today take science classes and know all about science and learning all kinds of really important things. And probably when you heard the business about the weather, you probably understand this, right? Right? Because, in fact, you can measure these things, right? You can, we have all kinds of instruments. We can have a thermometer, and we can have a wind gauge, and all that business, and we can measure all these things. And then I could do it all by myself, but we as a world have satellites and radar and all this business, and you can predict the weather incredibly accurately these days, right? Compared to when I was a kid, where it was like, well, it's probably going to be different tomorrow. That's pretty much it. Especially when you live around here. Right? And indeed, in our world, we've taken this to kind of really an incredible level, right? So we can measure average temperatures down to like the fraction of a degree, right? We can measure sea levels to a fraction of a centimeter, right? And we can interpret all that information and freak out. Oh my God, we're all going to die, right? Maybe we will, maybe we won't. That's not the point. But there's plenty of Chicken Littles out there who tell you we are, right? And again, that's not the point. The point is, we put incredible efforts in interpreting the appearance of the earth and the sky. We have this incredible fascination with the climate, right? You ever notice how no matter what it is, it's because of climate change? This is neither here nor there, right? It was hot yesterday, climate change. It was cold yesterday, climate change. It was dry yesterday, that lousy climate change, right? When's the weather? Just the weather. Right, well, that's an aside. And maybe there is something to that. That's not the point. But we obsess about this. We obsess about this. Right? But do we pay the least bit of attention? So we have an incredible level of interest in the physical climate. Right? But do we put the same amount of effort into the spiritual climate of the world in which we live? Now this is our area of expertise, right? Because after what Jesus says in the gospel, that's pretty much the end of my meteorological prediction abilities, right? If it's clouds over there, it's probably going to rain, right? If the wind's coming from down there, it's going to be hot. That's pretty much it, right? But shouldn't we apply that same level of measurement, if you will, that same level of interpretation to the spiritual climate of the world? Because we certainly don't, right? The world's a messed up place, more than it probably ever has been in many, many ways, right? Do we interpret the signs of the times, right? Do we measure the evils we find in our world? Right? And are we concerned about that? Do we raise the alarm about the spiritual climate crisis that we find ourselves in? Because as the Lord tells us in the Gospels in another place, if a man gains the whole world and loses his life, what good was it? Right? If we can keep this creaky place going for another billion years, What difference does it make if most of the people end up in hells or whatever that means, right? Should we put more emphasis on that? Or at least the same emphasis? Should we put at least the same emphasis on life, spiritual life, as we do on physical life? Right? And I think the last 2 years or whatever it's been now has kind of exacerbated that, right? We've become incredibly obsessed, and this is not a bad thing, right, about the preservation of physical life. Right? But again, do we apply that same rigor to our study, our interpretation of the spiritual climate of the world in which we live? Right? If nothing else, just the value of life, the value of human life, which is increasingly under threat. It's worse now than it ever was. So many years after Roe versus Wade, right? Increasingly, the life of the elderly and the sick is threatened. Right? That's just one example. Right? And then we could look at other things, corruption, the corruption of power in our world. Right? People continuing not to have enough to eat or proper shelter. Why? Not because there's not enough food, not because the climate crisis has killed all the crops. There's plenty of food. But there are corrupt people that stand in the way. There are corrupt people that use that to maintain their own power. Right? The spiritual climate of the world, there's something we should really be concerned about. Again, as the Lord teaches us, what good is if a man gains the whole world and loses his life?